99% of the kids you're speaking to will never be on ESPN, so why should they care?
We want kids and youth to have this entry point to sports.
You have a much bigger impact on the kids.
Right? We need to make sure coaches are well trained, that they feel comfortable, that the data that proves that things are going up, but some of them are going down.
Youth Sports Insider, where passion meets opportunity.
Welcome back to the Youth Sports Insider podcast. I am your host, Bill Litter. Today we have Kevin Martinez, VP of Corporate Citizenship at ESPN. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you today and sit back and have some real conversation with my cup of coffee and you.
Oh, yeah, I love it. Yeah, and we were just talking off air how just he's at his getaway cabin, and I love the fact that you came just all relaxed, ready to talk youth sports, and just two guys having a chat. But as we were talking off air, one of the things I was excited to dive in today is your initiative around getting more kids, play sports and back into sports.
Mm-hmm.
And before we dive into that, though, let's talk about the problem and really what alarmed you and ESPN to the state of youth sports in America. And does it just, I know it's probably a global, but is it just focused on the states? The initiative, yeah.
Yeah. So for right now, we are focused specifically on the US. We have had conversations with some of our partners in Canada. We think that there's, viability broadly because the statistics are international. The US has worse data, right? Meaning that more kids are dropping out. But yes, it's in the US specifically that we're focused on. That's our main core. Just for the listeners, my job in citizenship is corporate social responsibility. So my job, I'm not a foundation. We are not a nonprofit. We are part of the corporation. And so the strategy that we have aligns with the strategy of our business. And we're very, very transparent about that. The goal, good corporate responsibility is being responsible, business operators, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
So being relevant within the sector that you're in is really critical. We're in sports, so we need to talk about the issues in sports, whether it's sportsmanship or, youth sports or, lack of access for women or women are not excelling, whatever that is. We need to take our CSR messaging and programming and investments and build around that, because the goal that we have is that, and the research will all prove it, that this is really about expanding the audience, right? We're talking to parents, teachers, and coaches, but we want kids and youth to have this entry point to sports, because we know the data that if they don't participate, they are less likely to be sports fans. They are less likely to watch our networks. They're less likely to be part of the Disney, family. And so it's really important that we do it with integrity first and foremost. Yeah. We do it with authenticity as it relates to how we're engaging, and we do it with dynamic, valuable assets that only ESPN can bring to the table.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that and started off that way. And I think that's a really important point. I mean, your motive at the end of the day is to get more people watching and create more sports fans. And in my prep, I read this crazy stat, and I'm going to paraphrase, and maybe you can fill it in. And it's something that you had mentioned, but if you can get kids playing by the age of 5, they're 75% more likely to become a fan of that sport long term. Am I saying that correctly, or what's the?
So that's a stat that kind of is interpreted in different ways. Our research team is using a similar thing. I think a lot of it's coming from Aspen Institute, from different groups that are measuring and in this space, and so authorities in the space. But we're saying you are 6.8 times more likely to be an avid sports fan if you begin sports at the age of 5 or 6 years old, meaning, and beginning sports, entry into sports doesn't mean necessarily playing. It means watching with your dad or
Okay.
mom, or going to a
Okay.
game, or being
Yeah.
introduced to sports, but then have it become part of your life. That is a huge bell curve shift if you can do that right up front.
That is amazing. 5 years old. And to
Yes.
influence that when I heard that, I was just like, wow, yeah, that blew my mind. So okay, so this the let's go on this vein. So the
Yep.
stats show that 38.3% of kids are
Hmm.
playing sports current. Is it current?
Correct.
Correct. Okay, so only 38.3%. So one, do you have information on what is that a decline over post-COVID? What was it pre-COVID? What should the number be? And the
Right.
last question in that is, what do you think the factors are that to that, that made that decline in participation?
Yeah, so there's multiple factors, of
Hmm.
course, right? That
Yeah.
that that have driven that. And so to answer the first part of your question, we have seen an uptick, a very, very small uptick in
Yeah.
some sports, right? Tennis is hitting it out of the park.
Hmm.
As it relates to multi players coming in, a lot of that's due to pickleball, paddleball, and then they're taking
Okay.
on,
Yeah.
the new craze of uh, uh, racket sports, right?
Yeah.
Um, but we're seeing other things that, for a while, contact football was down. Now it's kind of going up
Hmm.
because of flag football, right? So it's
Yep.
iterative, is learning your skills and development. There are other sports that have had difficulty. Baseball had difficulty because it just was, the entry points were difficult. Even though the system is set up, and you and I will talk about the kind of institutionalization of sport, which I think is a determinant factor in a lot of the problems that we're addressing.
Yeah.
um, but there were little leagues and Pop Warner, and for football and all these different things, and so we move them into these very well thought out but islands of sportsdom and fandom, and then when they're done, they kind of fall off, or we only keep them in that island, and that is part of the problem. But to the point of, we are seeing some really good numbers come in sports related elements, but the goal, we've decided to pick on to take up the Aspen Institute's goal of, which is the federal government's goal of
Right. Yeah.
63%. We want 63% of youth to play a sport, to be involved in a sport in a year. Right now it's 38, 39%, right? So it's very,
Hmm.
very low.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that means playing the sport. That means getting in. That doesn't mean just addressables, right? Being, come in and, by the way, you held the bat and it was done. It's to show that there's sustainability in the fact, because that is a key element for success, right? Is to learn how to play. And it's really interesting, Bill. As part of the Walt Disney Company, we have been, saying our mantra over and over is that we love free play. Free play is fantastic. Get on that playground,
Yeah.
go play kick the can, which is what we used to do.
Yep.
Go do something really fun, right? But we
Yeah.
want to get people, young people, into sport, because we believe the value proposition for kids to help create the futures that they imagine really includes developing these skills that allow for them to have a clear understanding of what losing and winning and development and coaching and mentorship, teamwork, isolation, being in your mind when you're a runner and a long distance runner, what that brings to you to the rest of your future. Those are skills that we know empower education and empower the workforce, that empower other opportunities. I think the stat I always pull out is that we fund the Women's Sports Foundation Sports for Life program. But some of the anecdotal information that we get back from research, they worked with PwC, was that I think it was 93% of women in the executive office say that they learned their leadership skills by participating in sport. Right.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so that's a huge value proposition and a very interesting segment. So back to your original question, there are very there's data that proves that things are going up, but some of them are going down, and a lot of it's income inequity, right?
Mm,
Which is the number
mm,
one
mhm.
driver because things are
Yeah,
becoming so much more expensive. If you make $25,000 a year and you have to pay $1,000 for a child to engage into a travel team or sport or buy a bat or buy a tennis racket or pay for reg fees, that's prohibitive, right?
right.
And that's what
Yeah,
it's become to a large degree. So we need to look at that. It's not wrong. It means that there's not access. And so
right.
access to us is the preeminent entry point to create this equity and opportunity for everybody
Yeah.
in the pathway of sports.
Well, and that's a good point. You know, one of the things that really kicked off my um, coaching career was I was coaching high school at an all boys school, and it was I'm in the Bay Area. It's one of the best boys program in the Bay Area. And what I found over the years was those kids, we'd have 40, 50 boys try out for,
Yep.
3 teams. So that means we had to, there was a lot of cuts in there. And the kids who didn't have a trainer, they weren't on didn't have a good coach, didn't play AU, they might have just played, rec ball. They had no chance of making the team,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I saw that and I'm like, they just don't have access, right? And
Right.
then that led to other things like, whoa, their parents can't even get them to practice.
Right.
They
No,
don't have a
transportation is
car
a
or no
huge issue. Yeah.
transportation, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I created a program that would help fund their, participation. I
Hmm.
was a coach coming from a pretty prominent high school, so, I had that going for me. And then, I was able to attract kids to the program. We got funding. We got a gym, right? We revamped a gym, but that that changed a few people's lives in
Hmm.
that path, and that's the type of thing that we have to do at a grassroots level
Yeah.
to make those changes. So
Well, as a coach, you know that better than anyone, right? You're surveying the land of the environment for which you will manage, and that includes a lot of young minds, and it includes
yeah.
parents, and it includes,
Yes,
your administrators and all that
that's
type of
right.
stuff. They
Yeah,
want a winning team,
that's
but a
right.
coach can change the trajectory of a young person's life because let's just say they were on the edge of that cut,
Yeah,
but you know that this person has the will and the excitement and the leadership or this that can motivate the rest of the team. Is that worth the opportunity to move them in and give them that
yeah.
chance, right? And again, if you have to make cuts, you have to make cuts because that's part of sports.
Right, that's
But
part of sports. Yep.
making sure that your parents and everyone knows that you're not basing this on necessarily scholarship for D1, right?
Yeah,
Because
that's
you're
right.
trying
Yeah,
to just get them in the system, and you're not always trying to win. You're trying to create these young leaders, young athletes that are going to take this and one be self-sufficient amongst their own need state and their family state and their community, but also in the future, right? What is going to
yeah.
empower them for the future?
One of the things that I changed is just a mind shift from, I again, basketball coach, so I coach basketball. That's how I used to explain it and this completely changed my approach to the game and how I was with the kids. I changed it to I coach confidence. I just
Mhm.
happened to use basketball as the vehicle to coach that confidence. And when I made that mind shift to that, that just changed everything.
Yep.
And yeah,
Absolutely.
and I
Yeah.
think if we can communicate that message of you're not just coaching the sport, right?
Right.
You have a much bigger impact on the kids, and like I don't
Yeah.
care, I we all love to win, right? And we're gonna, get into this next question is there's this
Mhm.
mentality of winning is everything, but I think we also have to redefine what winning is and what winning means.
Absolutely. Yeah. We can't be so bold as to say, hey, when they're on the field, it's only about on the field. That is just not
Yeah.
true. We know
Right.
that that's not true for athletes, the most elite athletes. Steph Curry, it's not true for him. He needs to have downtime. He needs to be with his girls. He needs to be with his wife.
Right. Yeah.
All of that
Yeah.
stuff is part of, even as you get to the most elite levels, right? And those young people who boys will not, their brains will not formally be kind of at its potential until they're 27, and young girls until they're what, 21 or 18 or
Yep.
something like that. I mean,
Yep.
it is incumbent that we not be too, academic about this, but understand these young people
That's
need to
right.
be nurtured beyond what's on the field.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we look at well, I had a fun um circumstance this week that I thought, that's winning. And what it was is after practice, I coach two teams. I coach a 10U team and I coach 14U, both girls teams. And after practice, and this is when, and I say this just to show that you can have an impact on kids' life. The two of my girls came up to me and said, "Coach, will you do a TikTok with us?" And I thought, oh my gosh, they let me into their world,
Yeah,
right? And I was, of course, I'm like, what? Like, you want me to do, you sure about that? And then
yeah.
we worked on the little routine, the dance, and I was completely uncomfortable. It was something that I would never do. And my daughter, we do it, she never shares it, but we do it together, right? But I would, and they were going to share this. But you know what that taught me too was, you know what? I asked them to be uncomfortable all the time, right? And I
Mhm.
pushed them and, I'd put them in comfortable situations. And then, on the basketball court. And I thought, gosh, if I say no, just because I'm uncomfortable to that, right? I'm not a good coach in that particular case, right? So
Yeah. No, those are great learning lessons. Yeah.
yeah. So there seems to be this divide, right, between parents. We talked about it, accessibility, right, and getting access to sports. Could be money, location, whatever, transportation we talked about. This obviously has a huge impact on only 38% of, right, kids playing sports. But what do you have any sense of that piece of it, what that impact is? Are we talking, 15% don't have access, 20% don't have access? Is there any?
No, I don't think that there's been much in the research or studies on the barrier of access specifically for individuals, but I can tell you that there are 8 reasons why kids that are barriers and why they drop out, right? And
Okay,
actually,
yeah,
this is Aspen Institute work, which is,
right.
there's they don't have a coach, they don't have a good, well trained coach, they don't have that moment, they don't have a safe place to play. The cost of entry is too much. Their multi-sport has made injuries an issue. They don't feel safe in it. Transportation is one.
Mm,
There's those 8 reasons. And a lot of people are interesting. They're saying, "Oh, well, it's because they're playing games." I'm like, that is not the issue, and that is not the issue at all. It's what they fall back to, right? Or they're playing games anyway. Most kids are doing. They're
yeah.
not giving up one for the other necessarily, unless they're not allowed into the other. And then they put all this energy in. And then they
Mm,
become more interested in this, right? Because that's where they're having fun, which is the number one reason. I mean, it
yeah.
sounds so simple, but the number one reason kids join sports is to try to have this kind of moment of fun that they can be part of their universe, they can control, just like gaming, just like anything else you do, you know. And the number one reason they drop out, not having fun, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
having that element is really critical. So the fun moment here for ESPN and for the Walt Disney Company is that we need to create these moments that matter, that are really allowing for a family and youth to be in their space, enjoying the sport that they're in, challenged to even, try new sports or you name it, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to be uplifting here through this initiative that we're doing. And we haven't talked about it, Bill, but we launched the Take Back Sports Initiative
Right.
at the Project Play Initiative. And we've been working on this for a decade. We had the
Mm.
Don't Retire Kid campaign with Kobe Bryant. We did some really great work, and that was really about keeping kids in sports. And then we decided that we really needed to shift to get them into sports versus just keeping them in sports, right? Because the
Mm.
value
Hmm.
proposition was getting more kids into sports.
Yeah.
And so that's been really valuable. This Take Back Sports is really about four things, which are those barriers, which is number one, fun, right? We've got to be able to talk. This
Hmm.
campaign is for adults. So we're talking to parents, teachers, and coaches that are watching our networks or reaching out through the processes of our NGOs. But it really is about making sure that parents know that that's the reason, and we got to make sure that there's fun involved. The second is, and this will ring, your bells in your ears, is coaching, right? We need to make sure coaches are well trained, that they feel comfortable, that they know the assets there in this unusual world that we live in where things are changing overnight and this and that, whatever. Coaches are aware of the pressures that exist against young people. The second is multi-sport, which is, if you're going to have fun and you want to find your joy, the chances of you finding joy on your first outing is pretty nominal, right? For
Right.
anything that you ever do, right?
Yeah.
You may gravitate to something that you want to do, but like I played tennis in high school, but I took it up because I was a gymnast in high school, and I wasn't. My body's not built to be a gymnast, but I loved gymnastics. But I also loved that individual sport, and tennis gave me that opportunity because I was a quick twitch kind of
Mm.
athlete,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
And so that really helped me. But that multi-sport also keeps you from having injury, but that joy, that entry to joy. The last is rec leagues. We know
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
there is not enough money out in the system. And by the way, more of it's going to dry up very soon, right? The
Hmm.
federal grants that are coming down into parks, to recs, those are going to dry up, or
Yeah.
they're drying up now. So we have an obligation to make sure that to have fun, being our driver, that if you're a young person and you want to just like try a sport, or you really want to double down on the sport you're in, or you want good coaching, you've got to have these wonderful coaches like yourself that will give you that entry in boys and girls clubs and national parks and recs, in YWCAs, where it's not about just going travel team automatically because you're the
Right.
best athlete. It's
Yeah.
about you are a complete young person coming in trying to enjoy sport. So that's the four areas that we think are the biggest barriers, that are also the ones that we believe we can make the most impact on with this campaign, Take Back Sports.
And then how does that relate? Because you're also on the committee for the 60 by or 63 by 30
Yeah,
initiative that the um the US
Aspen has some.
government, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
How are those two related, or
So
how do they work together?
they're related in respect that they're parallel paths. The last time we worked with Aspen, we worked together on Don't Retire a Kid, and we had a
Hmm.
group of very amazing organizations, including, NBC was part of it, our frenemy, our competitor, right? But Adidas and Under Armour and Nike were involved, because all of this, Dick's Sporting Goods was involved, because
Hmm.
it's shared values. This is a problem, right? That
Yes.
is affecting each and everyone in this sector. The leagues are involved because
Hmm.
they are worried. My president, my chairman, said to me, as we pitched this to him, because we said we were going to develop a strategy to expand the audience, he said, Kevin, that's what keeps me up at night. It's not negotiating the contract for the NBA, et cetera. Yes, that has
Yeah.
issues. But if I'm going to be a president over time and change the culture and make
Mm.
us successful, I have to think the long term. If kids are dropping out of sports and they're not being sports fans, we got a problem. The leagues know that as well. And so all of the leagues have signed on to Take Back Sports, meaning that we're going to work with them, and in each of their institutional times and seasons, we'll start to talk about it, but we'll have common values, common language, and play 60 for NFL, we'll talk about that, right? Because
Yeah.
that is part of the opportunity to change that 63 number, and actually do it. The alignment isn't to drive necessarily 63. That's an outcome for us. It's to really take everything that ESPN has to offer and make sure that this message is consistent, that stakeholders like yourself, thought leaders like yourself, and others, people listening to this podcast, will remember this and look at ESPN and convening, organizations and sponsors and everyone together to remind them that we've got to work together to make this happen. Right? We're
Yeah.
incredible
That's right.
storytellers, so our
Hmm.
content will help drive that.
Yeah, and so with that said, so the content, I mean, if I'm watching ESPN, and should I expect to see more around this idea of getting kids to play and highlighting what? Like what set us our
Yeah.
expectations like
Yeah. No, you drive right to the question, Bill. You are asking, are you going to see Take Back Sports on Monday Night Football? And the answer is you will, right?
yeah,
Because what we've done is we've worked with all of our content leaders. Our chairman is the champion for this program because it is a business initiative. Our
yeah,
strategy and chief of staff officer is leading our elements, helping us stay online using all the assets of our business, our brand, our research, our creative services. And the goal is that you're not going to see it all the time. And by the way, it's not going to be a seminal moment every time you see it. You may see a watermark that comes up on
mm,
something, says Take Back Sports, as we're talking about youth sports, right? To
yeah,
remind people that this is an initiative that has connectivity, that has sustainability, but also has the power to make change, right? So you'll also hopefully see some long form. Well, we'll talk about youth sports. You'll see some sports center moments where we're doing the top 10. You'll see PSAs. We're developing them right now. I got the first iteration of our first PSA today, and I'll give you a little bit of a look in. But if
yeah, that'd be
for
great.
those of us that remember Schoolhouse Rock,
Oh yeah,
where you
yeah,
learn how government made a bill, we're going to
yes.
take that same strategy and talk about sports.
Okay,
And so we'll do some stuff like that, but we're going to try to be innovative and fun because that's the important thing. But remember, we're talking to parents, teachers, and coaches. So Little
right.
League, we're going to go deep into Little League. We'll go deep into Special Olympics, which we're the broadcaster of. We're working with
Hmm.
the NBA on some of the they do with their mental health initiatives because that is important in particularly as it relates to have fun, right? We just got off the phone with the Ad Council last week, and they're doing an initiative called Love Your Mind. We're looking to how do
Hmm.
we connect these things, right? So
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's what
yeah.
we're going to be in. So you will see it.
So the name itself, Take Back Sports. Who are we taking it back from?
Well, I think it's a tongue-in-cheek perspective
I'm
because
sure,
what
yeah.
we what we here's the institutionalization of sport. We looked at 195 names. We
Wow.
paid someone to go
Okay.
out and search. We did IP. I mean, we have to be really careful, right? We
Right.
can't take
Right.
someone else's thought leadership, right?
Right.
So all of that. So what we did is we centered in this ability that the nomenclature isn't about what it is, it's about what it becomes. So take back sports means we're giving you the power to make sports what's right for you, right? In so doing, we're driving the message around fun, right? So
Mm-hmm,
we
mm-hmm.
want everyone to understand we want to bring more fun back to the game for youth so that they will test and try and find their joy in this space. So that's why we're calling it Take Back Sports.
And let's go deep into the fun aspect. What
Yeah.
does the research say that makes sports fun for kids?
So there is a bevy of it, and
Yeah,
I'm not an authority here. So this is where my team really becomes
sure.
way more powerful than
Yeah.
what I can share with you. But what we do know as the bookends of driving motivator, participate, and driving motivator to quit, that the elements inside of it are that they are finding a community. So they're making friends. That is a
Yeah,
major piece of
for
it, right?
sure. Yeah.
We have a generation of young people that literally think about it. They have been through pandemics, through uh, major governments, through, yeah, I mean, just
Hmm.
lots of stuff, right? And so
Right, right.
they have they are the unhappiest generation by testing ever, right? So if they're unhappy, then part of our job as adults and good citizens is to find ways to make them happy as parents, teachers, and coaches. So that's the number one thing. And as part of the Walt Disney Company, we've shifted our strategy globally across the company for corporate responsibility, talking about the well-being of kids and families when it's needed most, right?
Hmm.
And those moments that matter, that allow us to really say, okay, for us in sports, it's about the moment that kid connects with sports and has fun, creates a family, creates a connection with a mentor and a coach where they feel like they're learning something, because we all love that moment when you have that epiphany and learn, but that they're having friends, that they're creating a team, or if they're not on a team sport, they're learning how to kind of develop and have transactionally deal with issues in their life, or their training. I'm thinking of course, a long distance runner, which I am not one, so that's why I'm having a hard time finding the word. But those types of things, right? Like all of those things are literally what is very simple. The kids just want to engage and have these moments that they like are part of something, right? And that's
Right.
what sports
That's
brings.
right. Yeah. Well, and you again, you hit a soft spot for me too. I had one of my players last week share with me. She's she's eighth grader. She goes, I haven't been happy since the before the pandemic. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that just shocked me that one, she shared it, but two, that she really has a deep sadness and she can't define why. And she says she comes to basketball because for at least for that hour and a half, that or 3 hours a week that we have practice, it kind of just disappears and she
Yeah,
can be in her happy spot,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And
Um,
and first of all, oh my God, that she's told you that, right? So that's an
right,
important piece. That's a
right,
great coach. That's someone that she said, oh my gosh, I can tell him this, right?
right.
Because it might be affecting my play or my attitude or whatever else. But the other piece of it is that, this generation is also much more forthright about talking that they're having difficulty, right? Which is a really
Hmm.
important empowerment piece, right? Then what? What do we
Right.
do,
Yeah. What
right?
do we do with that
So having
information,
tools
right?
to be able to respond to that is
Yes,
really critical, right?
that's
And
right.
young girls, man, we run a couple of major programs where I've learned things about, we don't have kids, but
Hmm.
young girls struggle in ways that I, as a man, do not understand, right?
Correct.
Like
Yeah.
body image.
Hmm.
There's some dimensional problems with bullying with girls that's really difficult, mostly on social media, that young men don't have the same type of approach. It is a
Hmm.
different correlation. So my point is these different groups, it's important for us to kind of open the curtains and look in and say, how can we help? And then go to the next and open the curtains and look in and make sure that we can provide the storyline such that, again, stakeholders, nonprofits, organizations, community programs can kind of mobilize around this to try to make some change.
Yeah, and the one thing that I always talk about too is I break it down because we have this thing we call the red dot through my program,
Mm,
and it talks about the game in your head and the game on the court. So there's two pieces of it, and the first red part stands for rebounding, efficient scoring, defense, right? The sport aspect of it. And again, I talk about my philosophy. If we can master those three things, right, we can have success on the court. And then I talk about the dot, which is drive open together. That's the game in our head. So you got to bring energy and effort, which is drive. Open is being coachable, not only to me, but to your teammates as well, who are going to, get on you sometimes about, hey, catch the ball or whatever it is, right?
yeah, yeah,
You got to be coachable. And the last thing is which you touched upon, which is this togetherness, the community aspect, the love aspect. And we physically manifest that by there's a pressure point between your pointer finger and your thumb, and we put a red dot before every practice. So when you make a mistake, and I always talk about it's not if you're going to screw up today, because if
of
you
course.
don't, I'm not doing my job. I'm not pushing you
Right.
hard enough, right? All you got to do is push that and say next play. And I said you could carry that through put that red dot when you're taking a test,
Yeah.
right? Next play. Okay, I'm getting a little anxious. Let me push that. And then at the end of every practice, we do peer recognition. And actually, I just have some sitting here on my desk. You know those little Avery red dots that you
Yeah.
get, the stickers, right? I don't know if you see that
Yeah.
there, but
I can.
um, we give a red dot to the player, or the players recognize each other. And I just say, hey, who wants to give the first red dot out? And they say, somebody raises their hand and they pick one of their peers. I'm going to give a red dot to,
Mhm.
Marissa because she did X, Y, and Z. And we give out three a night. So that way, we bring this game, we put it all together and we talk about the game in our head and the game in the sport. And, that there's just, and just even when you're talking about, you can see I'm a little passionate about this. When you're talking about, it's not just the skills that how to shoot a basketball. Even for ESPN, there's so much more to unwrap about youth sports. It's such a
Yeah.
big initiative.
Yeah. Without a doubt. And kudos to that. I have not heard that approach, and I just think it's beautiful. We're going to be working with the Positive Coaching Alliance to do a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the work that we do, and I know you're aware of them. But
Yeah,
we've asked the Positive Coaching Alliance to look at best practices and keep them churning, because each group will have a different approach. And
yeah,
gosh, the learnings that exist in that, all of that can be applied to future, you know, times in the office, or when you're with your, your spouse or partner and things aren't going
absolutely.
well,
That's right.
press that dot
Press
because
it on. Yeah, 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 absolutely.
anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, I forgot the question there, but I wanted to
Well,
just say
no, it's just more
kudos
of
to
a,
you.
yeah, no, it's just more of a comment that it's so big and there's so
Mhm.
many aspects to it. You talk about the game in the head, the game on the court, in this case, basketball or whatever it is, right? The field, the pitch. Um, you're looking at all of the factors that go into this only 38.3% of kids
Yeah,
playing sports. It's not just, oh, just make the coaches better, and
right.
therefore, right?
No,
It's such a bigger
yeah.
problem.
And
But
and
how,
Bill,
oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Bill. We
No, no,
can't
you're
boil
good.
the ocean. Okay. I
No,
always tell
no,
people, like,
exactly.
everybody, like, okay,
Yeah,
you're Disney, you're ESPN, you
that's
should just be
right.
able to, like, boom, and it's
That's right.
over. Like, that's not
No,
how this works, right?
no,
Right.
no.
There are
Yeah,
there are thought leaders bigger than us that have been working on this for a long, long time. We just want to bring people together with others, and even if we have divergent opinions, like, we're not saying travel teams are bad, but like when a when a local community is focused so heavily on travel teams that leaves everybody off the field because you got, X number of people that can, and then it costs money, and then, there's all this
yeah,
stuff. So we just need to be smart, like, and we need to be innovative, like,
that's right.
how are we bringing those that can't afford in, right? And you've
Hmm.
talked about it, right? It's like to help fundraise and whatever. But my point is there's room for everybody here. ESPN is one piece of it, but uh, I say we're Coke and Pepsi, because we have advertisers that are Coke and Pepsi. We're Under Armour, and Nike, and Adidas, and
Yeah,
all that
right.
stuff, right? So we have to be
Yeah.
smart about this.
Well, and actually, when I first reached out to you to um, be on the podcast, one of my things was, okay, we're no ESPN. We don't have the audience of ESPN, but will you still be on the podcast? And really, what I was saying to you too, and you just said it yourself. Hey, you're Disney, you're ESPN, but we're not the only person that needs, or company that needs to be behind this, because it's a huge issue and it's a huge problem. And we're pointing out to long-term impact on the future and the future leaders that are leading, the companies, down the road. But
Yeah.
how are you going to measure that impact for you guys? What is that? When is this program a success?
So it's a good question, and I hope that, okay, what we've said is that it's an initiative that will last at minimum 1 year, right? Because I have to
Okay.
kind of build a structure that allows for me to, like, go get my game on, right?
Yeah.
But we think this is where we're going to be for a while, right? We've been investing in youth sports for, since we started, right? But
Yeah.
major strategic investments in the last decade.
Mhm.
millions and millions of dollars. And it was about empowerment and leadership
Yeah.
and access. But we really decided access was our key, right? The way that we're looking at this is multi kind of functional. Like I said, we're ESPN. Our superpower is storytelling.
Yeah.
So we have a content integration sheet that I look at every week saying, were we able to get Make-A-Wish into Sports Center? Were we
Okay.
able to kind
Yeah.
of at the Super Bowl see if Special Olympics was going to be talked about with Unified Sports, one of our partners?
Mhm.
Are we having so we're looking at those things. Those that we've planted, those that are happening organically, journalism, etc. And then
Yeah.
applying the conversation. That's the first. The second is we're very clear about this, that this is about building our business. So how is our research team also measuring,
Mhm.
is this doing an uplift? And I'll be,
Right.
again, transparent with you. I'm in corporate responsibility. One of my measurement tools is, assisting the work for our company. But again, my outcomes are that all boats rise and society is better because of what we did. We have to have a really clear measurement of what society, good looks like, or a lift. And so for us, that's a reputational tool, right? Which is, if we do that, do your listeners and others believe that ESPN and the Walt Disney Company are stronger, better companies, that they believe and have integrity? Our brand, that when we do journalism, you believe us, right?
Right.
This is one of the number one indicators of movement for reputation is corporate responsibility. So we needed to be really smart and strategic with that. The third piece is we are grant makers as well. So my team is making
Mm.
grants. I just got a list of the ones that we're going to be doing on the next round. And there are innovation grants, which is like, who's thinking of this differently? So is Frisbee going to be part of this? Is that going to be kind of interesting for multi-sport? Are there going to be elements that are really focused on those economic, elements
Yeah.
for Parks and Rec, particularly, with the refunding? So that each of those grants has KPIs in them that says
Okay. Yeah.
4 areas. Okay, there we go. So,
Yep.
so each of those grants will be afforded a KPI that they need to report back. And this is where, grant makers, you have to show impact. You have to demonstrate that there's impact. And
Mm.
then the cycle begins again because impact becomes outcome. So what stories are happening at Boys and Girls Clubs that when we're in market with College Game Day, I can go tell that story on College Game Day back to content, right?
Mm.
So that's
Right.
our
Right.
that's our
Right.
measurement tools and process.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And one of in my research that, there were, and I've read some things, a lot of positive, but there were some skeptics. Like, what's, ESPN, how can they,
Yeah,
only 1% of the kids who play sports will ever, it's probably less than that, will be on ESPN, right?
yeah, yeah,
99% of the kids you're speaking to will never be on ESPN, so why should they care? And I'm glad
yeah,
you framed that in the very beginning, why you care, because it is a societal issue.
yeah, absolutely. And by the way, okay, name one time you've done anything that there's always, a polarization and someone says, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about," or "That's not good."
Right.
I'm like, listen,
Yeah,
we're trying to help.
that's
Corporate
right.
responsibility, we don't have the solution here. We're asking other people to come up with a solution,
Yeah.
and that we will invest and fund and tell the story around. But, listen, you either on the boat or you're off the boat, right? Because if
Right.
this is important to you, we're saying that we want to keep this alive so that we can help you solve the problems that exist in Topeka, Kansas, or Seattle, Washington for sports, right? And so the 1%, we're not talking athletes on our networks, right? We're talking about who's watching the
Right.
networks,
Yeah.
right? And we want everybody to be a sports fan. We want everyone to love football and women's gymnastics and all that stuff. Find your joy in that space. So we believe this is a clear and dedicated strategy to try to lift up, to create new sports fans. So the 1% is really critical because it's a tactic of the conversation you have with youth, with your parents, teachers, coaches, and caring adults. But again, it's actually much less. It's
Yeah.
0.01,
I was gonna
right?
say, yeah. Right. Yeah.
So
Uh,
that are going to ever make it in the big leagues. But you may have moments of infrastructure, whether you're a sports fan or you want to be in the sports industry or you're in the
Yeah,
advertising industry and all of a sudden you're sponsoring sport. There's sports is a ubiquitous space to
that's
be, right?
right.
So
Yeah.
our my only counter to that is instead of finding something wrong, find something right and get on it and teach us to be better at it.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's the right on. And tell us who you've launched with some partners and well, back up. So you're contributing $5 million to this program, right? And
Mhm.
that is in the form of grants that you're planning on giving out, correct?
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
Bay Area guy, so I got to bring up Steph Curry and what he's doing
Yep.
in Oakland is one of your partners, right?
Yep. So Steph was our first ambassador because he we told him about Kobe and what was going on, and he's been in this space. But we've also been looking at Eat, Learn, Play, which is
Yeah.
their charity. And just for a little bit of transparency, ESPN does not support athlete charities. We have made a decision that's not our core.
Mm,
That's not what we should be doing. Also, unfortunately, many of them are not very good, right? And it's just truth. The IRS, they
yeah.
don't even meet IRS guidelines, right?
Uh,
And so, but we've made decision that we're willing to flip that if we can demonstrate that there is a core capacity of a leader that is doing amazing work. Steph is one of the top of the
yeah.
list.
We talked, I met Steph and he's just a genuine
Oh,
person,
his
right?
wife,
His
and
wife
they're
too.
all
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
right? But to
Right.
your point, Oakland, right? So here's a community that has lost all the major sports teams, right?
Right.
And
Right.
they thrived in many of that. It is a very diverse community. It is a
Yep.
socially, economically diverse community just because it's in the Bay Area, but the majority of it is not going to, giant games. They're
Right.
not, right? They can't
Right.
afford it. Even the number of people that say they've never been to San Francisco and Oakland is amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, just saying for young people and families, it's not as easy as one would think. Getting across the Bay Bridge and spending money in San Francisco. So the point is what Steph and Aisha are doing are really um, game changers because what they've done is they said we're going to take on Oakland, the city of, and we're going to drive into what we think are three major issues, right? Which is
Hmm.
this: you got to have food for kids to survive and
Yeah.
exist, and people just don't understand. Sometimes they only get one meal a day, and that's lunch
That's
at
right.
school,
Yeah.
right? During summertime, they may not get that. So you're making 25, $40,000 a year, and you got two kids, and that's hard work, an apartment, everything else. So the eat piece, the learn piece, which is education, give everybody the opportunity to have a future by learning, right? The play piece is the sport plays. We believe that his formula is right in the full aggregate of creating kids that can create the futures they imagine. Those three things are going to be instrumental in their success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been keeping an eye on that too. And I have to reach out and get them on the podcast because again, I think that's a great model for other communities to follow, even if it's on a small percentage. And my wife, she owns a nonprofit and she works she helps families transition from homelessness and
Mm-hmm.
helps them furnish, it's called Grateful Gatherings, helps them furnish their
Yeah.
first apartment, gets them or whatever, their living situation. And we see that firsthand. And a lot of these kids, that I hear, and she always brings, tells me their stories about, you know, they have ability to play sports but can't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're sleeping on the floor, so they're not getting a good night's sleep. They're eating
Right.
one meal a day, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so it's again
Yeah.
going back to what we talked
Right.
about, this huge problem,
Right.
right? That's not
Well,
just about the technique.
and the society that we're in, which is one of the best things in the world about the United States and our society, and
Yeah,
particularly charitable endeavors, right? We target in, and we're like, we're going to work on homelessness, right? And
right.
we just go deep, and we're like, well, then get them homes, right? Like pay for homes. But what we've learned is that's not the solution, right?
No,
Because you are
no.
unhoused because of many issues in your
That's right.
life, social, economic, you
Absolutely.
know, family issues, all of this stuff,
Abuse,
right?
yeah, right.
Mental wellness, if you're a veteran, all of this stuff. So we can't boil the ocean, but it's good to know that those things are indicators or influencers related. Same thing for the sports space. Again, it is one element of growth and development. It is not the contingent growth element, but it is one that we know is put you on a trajectory of success if you do it correctly.
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, you
Yeah.
you nailed that. I mean, I hear that all day from my wife saying that exact same thing. Uh, okay, so two questions to end. The first question is this: there are thousands of coaches listening right now.
Yep.
They're thinking, well, I don't, I can influence, let's say 20 kids, right? Because I might be coaching 20 kids in a year. What is the message to them that they can do that to have an impact on the kids that they serve? What would you want to say to them?
Yeah. Well, again, not my expertise. My teams and the partners that we have, Positive Coaching Lions, other groups. But I will tell you that what we've learned is that coaches are the seminal dynamic in that trajectory of success once kids create the access, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I would say to coaches is look who doesn't have the access, and who wouldn't necessarily make the team. Can they
Mm,
be involved in and around? Can they take stats? Can they help? Can they, can you test them? Can they be ball boy? Can they, all of that
mm,
stuff, right?
mm,
And I know,
mm,
and know most coaches do this. The other thing too is remember, we believe that until you reach a certain age, that it's not really about the institutional definition of winning. It really is about having the ability to lose and to understand what that means, because
that's
you're
right.
doing development, you're growing. You've transactly said, here's, you can deconstruct it and say, here's why we lost, and here's whatever,
Hmm.
your 3-point shooting sucks, right?
Right, right.
That's all
Yeah,
you want to take, right? And I'm not a good coach. But my point is the opportunity to truly be a mentor is phenomenal, is to take that on and to take as much training as you can and ask for more training. So that's look for that. So in our Take Back Sports, one of the first things we're doing is we're going to be launching an initiative with Positive Coaching Alliance, specifically in that space, as others will, right? Not just us,
right,
others, right? We're going to
right.
bring attention to it. The third thing is I know for a fact, and we hear this all the time in the research and anecdotally, that parents are the best things and sometimes the worst things for coaches.
Yeah.
So, so understanding that having a dialogue with your parents about, you don't want to be patronizing, but your coaching style and what you hope to get up front, to make
Hmm.
sure that they understand that you're mentoring a specific way for a specific outcome. And as you said, with your DOT program, to be able to share that with them and understand that dot then at the end of the day is really about team and creating community, because ultimately we're going to take your young person and we're going to create community for them, for a safety net, for opportunity, for for
That's
enjoyment.
right.
And then last, and I'll always say this, is that focus on fun.
Yeah.
Focus on fun. Focus on fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And that you're going back to the red dot is, the kids will say, Coach, they'll stop mid-practice and Coach, you forgot to do a red dot, because we do a little marker, right, with the red dot. We forgot to give out red dots. They'll stop practice. I'm like, okay, absolutely. It's a big deal, right? We got to stop.
You
And
created a monster.
I created a monster, which I
Yeah.
absolutely love, right? Because they have that to fall back on. And, again, warms my heart when they say, Coach, I had a test today and I put the red dot. I'm like, that's exactly right. That's
Boom.
what you're supposed to
Boom.
do. So, um,
Unbelievable.
all right, last question here is, okay, we're going to come back and let's say a year and a half, 2 years, right? And have a
Mhm.
conversation about this. What change do you hope to see in youth sports in that time from now until maybe a year and a half, 2 years out?
Oh man, that's such a good question. I'm so much a futurist. I'm trying to always live, 6 to 12 months out, because I have to make change that takes a long time to make, right?
Right. Yeah.
My runway is long; it's not short. I'm not, Sports Center where I need, something up and running and
That's right.
2 minutes
Yeah.
left.
Yeah.
Um, but the question I think is, we're never going to have that perfect state, right? So let's
Right.
just start
No.
there, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's work from there and say what we're hoping is that the dialogue and the narrative around sports is, and I'm going to use the word inclusive because it needs to be, for access, right? So
Yeah.
that we're inviting everyone in to play because we fundamentally believe that sports is an asset that will help you create a trajectory that is successful for your future, right?
Yep. Yep.
So that narrative is more common and it's more collaborative and it's more consistent across every institutional organization. And I'm not saying they need to use our words or our brand. That part I don't care about, right? But I do believe that fundamentally we are losing conversations around that when we're talking about travel teams, or we're talking about
Mm.
social inequity, meaning that there it's just true that the people of color usually are people that don't have the same access or resourcing. But we also have seen, I'm looking at stats here, we're seeing young white boys drop out of sports at huge rates and
Huge.
specific sports, football being
Mhm.
one of them. We want them to engage in that. So like that narrative needs to continue. So in 2 to 5 years, I hope the industry becomes more aligned, and less my ideas only the good idea, which we see a lot of out there because a lot of it's based on money and revenue. You see these new sports facility sites coming up, and yeah, we provide 12 scholarships a year. And you're like, well, that's great, but you're a $200 million facility, and your cost of entry is $2,000 a year. And yes, you're training, but why aren't you bringing more in? We need to hold the sports, and I will say this firsthand, and I want people to quote me. We need to hold sports accountable for being corporately responsible.
Mm.
It's not just a pastime, it is a business.
Yeah.
And our business demands that we make life better for other people as they watch us, as they participate with us, and they learn through the content we develop. So I'm hoping those things kind of congeal and become more of the nut of the argument that has concentric, or the onion that has more rings
Yes.
on it, all of that.
Yeah. And that's just constant, you know, constant conversation, constant drips, constant, right? You're
Mhm.
leveraging ESPN and the media and the storytelling and
Mhm.
hopefully that just, right, keeps that the car moving down the road, if you will, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I guess I would just put comma or semicolon, and I'm seeing amazing changes, hence why we changed some of our policy on athletes.
Mm.
We're seeing our athletes, our elite athletes, know that their entry point was determinant on a great coach or a
Yeah.
teacher, or
Right.
their parents like didn't do bingo and went to let paid for them, right? They're one great, or go to a movie because they wanted to make sure that they had access to sport. So I think these athletes are really critical, hence why we're using athletes as ambassadors in this process. We also have Luca, who just signed with
Oh
the,
yeah. Yeah.
the the Lakers. He just joined us. We have some more that we're going to
Mm.
be sharing in each sport. But they care and they are good at this because they've been brought up knowing that this is part of their opportunity and that would change their life. So let's keep that going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Lucas just launched his initiative in basketball too. So,
Yep. Yep.
yeah. Oh, that's
And
great.
we got him
Well,
on Good Morning America to launch it.
oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, go, very
Yeah.
cool. Uh,
Yeah.
well, Kevin, this has been, I think we could probably go on for another hour talking about this stuff. I think we're both passionate about the subject, and I appreciate you taking the time and the time that you're probably spending away trying to relax and recoup for the long weekend.
No, it's all
But
good. I'm literally looking at scripts all day long. So it's
oh,
all
really?
good.
Okay, good. Well, I appreciate it, and best of luck on this initiative. And final word, where can coaches learn about what you're working on in this initiative in particular so they can participate in any way that they feel necessary?
Yeah, so two things. I never leave a meeting without asking for something as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that your coaches will come. We're going to launch this new initiative with Positive Coaching Alliance, which
Hmm.
is going to have very simple top line entry level introduction into that. But then I would like them to go deeper. So we'll announce that probably in about 4 weeks. So, giving you a heads up. And it's for parents, teachers, and coaches and caring adults to say that you are important,
Hmm.
referees as well. And so I'd love for your listeners to try to take one more step with me as we go into this and kind of go through this link that will be on the Positive Coaching Alliance's website in our partnership with them, and keep us honest and keep us going and put comments in there and everything. But the second thing I'd like to do is that this movement for us to
Hmm.
keep consistent at ESPN, I need to demonstrate that people are listening, right? So
Hmm.
when you see
Hmm.
it, text it or do something or say something or put it out there or whatever to other coaches, share it, because I've got to create synergy around the program so that I can keep it alive and keep it funded.
That's a really good point. Yeah, well, we'll do our part. We'll make sure we continue to share this particular podcast, for a while and get the message out there as best we can. Kevin, thank you so much. I appreciate you being on the
Absolutely.
show today and sharing Take Back Sports. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your leadership and thank you for your commitment and thanks for all that are listening. I know it's hard work, but it's a joy. It's
It's a
when
joy.
it
Yes.
works out right.
All right. Well, take care. And you Sports Insider listeners, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Stay tuned for more interviews just like this. Till next time.